We'd like to welcome everyone tonight. My name is Charlene Margot, co-founder of nonprofit The Parent Venture. We have with us Emily Kircher-Morris, who'll be talking with you about helping neurodivergent kids manage all the feels. Take it away, Emily.
Thank you so much for having me. So, as Charlene mentioned, I live outside of St. Louis, Missouri. I'm a licensed professional counselor, but I'll give you a little bit of background just about my experiences and kind of what brought me to this work before we launch into the presentation with the slides and everything. So I started my career in education, actually. I started as a classroom teacher, and then I also worked for a while in gifted ed before really wanting to dive more into that social and emotional piece of supporting kids. So I have a second master's in counseling and family therapy. I worked for a while as a school counselor, and then I moved into my practice, in like 2011. It's hard to believe it's been so long. But part of what got me to the point where I was even interested in that is that as a kid, I was diagnosed with ADHD when I was in fifth grade, which for women my age, it was really pretty uncommon. Most people, at that time, I feel like ADHD really kind of was where autism has been within the last 5 to 10 years for ourselves, and just learning more about it. And I always try to put this into context too when we're talking about neurodivergence and understanding why it is that we're really just starting to learn about it so much right now. So where I was diagnosed with ADHD in like 1991, 1992, something like that, Asperger's, which of course we don't use that label any longer, wasn't even officially added to the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, or the DSM, until 1994. And so prior to that, there was nobody being diagnosed. My first year teaching was the 2001-2002 school year. And halfway through the school year, the school counselor came in and said that one of the students in my class had something that she had just learned about at the State School Counselors Conference called Asperger's. So from 1994 to 2001 was how long it took for that to filter down to the school counselor at the school where I was working. And it wasn't until 2013, when the newest DSM was released, that you could even be given both an ADHD and an autism diagnosis. So there's just been a real evolution. Of course, Asperger's is now rolled into that autism spectrum diagnosis, but there are a lot of people out there who have been missed or misdiagnosed. We're really learning so much more about it. And so when I work with my clients, I'm recognizing and the growth that we've made in so many different ways, reflecting on my own experiences and knowing that school should not have felt as hard as it did for somebody. And that was why I got into education, was because I wanted it to be better. And so, it's been a great opportunity to kind of make some change with all of these different things. So here are my slides. Hopefully everyone can see this. Please let me know if you are unable to for any reason.
Looks perfect.
What's that? Oh, I thought I heard something. Okay.
Sorry. Go ahead, Emily. Sorry, just telling you it looks perfect.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. So a little bit about some of the things I've done since I've been in private practice. So I am the host of the Neurodiversity podcast. We have over 260 episodes and close to 3 million downloads. I always recommend, if you like to listen to podcasts, definitely check it out. It's a great resource. You can search based on a lot of different issues that might be relevant. These are my first 3 books. As I mentioned, I started my career in gifted education, and teaching. Twice exceptional is a term, if you're not familiar with it, that means somebody who is both has a disability and is also cognitively gifted. So somebody who is both gifted and autistic, or gifted in ADHD, or gifted and dyslexic, whatever. So that's what that twice exceptional term means. Here's a picture of my newest book that we mentioned, Neurodiversity-Affirming Schools. And I'm going to do a drawing for one of these books. You can kind of choose. If you want a copy of Neurodiversity-Affirming Schools, the new one, if you win, you can have this one. If you want a copy, if you're more in the parenting space and you want Raising Twice Exceptional Children, I will just say, even if your child's not identified as cognitively gifted, this is still a great resource. And actually, a lot of the tools that I'm talking about come from this book. And so it can be really useful as well, but you can pick whichever one. If you want to give the Neurodiversity-Affirming Schools one to someone in your life who's an educator, that is great. And I will also put that link in the chat for you so you can click it there if you would like to. So maybe I didn't put the HTTP. Let me just do this real quickly. Try it that way. Okay, so you should be able to click on that link now. So let's talk about all the feels and really think about what are some of the factors that influence emotional regulation. Why is it that so many neurodivergent kids experience all of these feelings? There's actually a lot to this. So when you think about all of the things that go into this, we know, for example, that a lot of autistic individuals experience a lot of stress and anxiety when there are unexpected changes. Sometimes they have a harder time communicating about emotions. Sometimes those emotions come on and they're very big. If you talk to any psychologist who does assessments or works with ADHD individuals, you will find that they will talk about how emotional regulation is one of the biggest factors that they struggle with. Sometimes it has to do with some impulsiveness or some rejection sensitivity. And there's a lot of different reasons why we might see this, but even with other types of neurodivergence. Let's think about somebody who has a diagnosis of dyslexia, for example. When you are a student and you are growing up and you are in school and you are dyslexic, that is very anxiety provoking. And so how does that manifest? It shows up as perfectionism. It shows up as stress. And how do you handle that stress? Because you're in this environment that perhaps isn't always supporting you or isn't accommodating you as best it can. So there are a lot of factors that really influence emotional regulation and make it harder for some of our kids to do this. So what we're going to talk about today is the I CAN method for regulating emotions. So I'm a sucker for a good acronym. I love a good acronym. And so this is a 4-step process, and it's going to be extremely practical tools that you can take with you and use right away with the young people or older people in your life. I feel like when we're talking about supporting neurodivergent individuals, it's really important to rely on very explicit instruction, because things that seem like quote unquote common sense, if somebody's struggling with it, well, then it's not common sense for them. They need additional support. So we want to break things down as clearly as we can. So this is a tool that I developed that is in this book, Raising Twice Exceptional Children, and it kind of really walks through it in a lot of detail. But what I like about this is that you can use it in a lot of different ways. So first of all, you can use it as a 4-step process. Literally, when somebody is experiencing emotional dysregulation, you can go ahead and walk through these steps with them to help them get through that dysregulation. But what's even a better way to do this is to introduce these concepts and talk through them, build the skills, especially at times when things are calm, so that when that emotional regulation does come or dysregulation comes to the surface, they can, they have the tools right there, and you can then talk about it or recognize it, and identify it as what's going on in that moment. These are tools that you can have. You can talk about them all at once and kind of explain all 4 steps, or you can just have it as part of the conversation that you are, like just in general conversations, like, oh yeah, that reminds me of this step in the I CAN method, or how could you handle this with this particular idea? Having this shared language of the I CAN method for regulating emotions is a great tool to help scaffold those skills and build them for our kids. So let's dig into it. What are we really talking about? So our first step in the I CAN method for regulating emotions is to investigate. We want to we need to build awareness around dysregulation and recognize and understand signals as they build. So, as we kind of think about this, we need to figure out, like, what are the things that are activating that emotional dysregulation? Sometimes kids are not great at really identifying this. To be honest, sometimes there are adults who are not great at identifying these things. But when we are able to reflect on this and identify specifically what are the factors that are influencing this, that's just a foundational piece to be able to then move forward and find tools to regulate them. So we want to help kids find a way to keep track of their triggers. There are a lot of different ways to do this. You can use a physical chart with paper pencil, like keep just kind of like tallies, for example. I've got kids who have, who I share a Google sheet with, where they kind of, at the end of the day, just go through and mark anything that they noticed caused some dysregulation, whatever it might be, but just building that awareness, bringing it to that level of consciousness and reflecting. Because often what happens is when kids get dysregulated, you say, well, what's going on? What's on your mind? What happened? What led to that? And sometimes they just can't even really identify it. The other part of this actually is that sometimes the surface level dysregulation, the thing that somebody identifies as the dysregulation, is not actually the cause of the dysregulation. So for example, I often find that when I'm talking with kids and teens about how to manage their emotions, and we're talking about a certain event that maybe took place, what I find is that if you backtrack, they have this outward manifestation of those emotions, but really what's going on internally is something that maybe happened previously. And it a lot of times has to do with the emotion of disappointment or embarrassment or shame. Those tend to be emotions that are very dysregulating, that are also very difficult to talk about. And so what ends up happening is you often see this explosion or this frustration that comes out, and a lot of times it's directed at somebody when that's not necessarily what actually caused that dysregulation. Sometimes it's also just the accumulation of a bunch of different stressors. And so recognizing that is important as well. It's really important to recognize that transitions between activities are one of those big factors that can cause that dysregulation. I think when we talk about autism specifically, we talk a lot about difficulty transitioning between activities, but autistic individuals are not the only people who struggle with this. A lot of ADHDers do as well. So when we think about ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, it's really not the best name because rarely is it a deficit of attention. It's actually more like a difficulty with regulating attention. It's a difficulty with, it's almost like not being able to manage it. So sometimes it's the distraction and being aware of all of the things going on around me, or sometimes all of the things that are going on internally, and not being able to maintain my focus on a certain thing. But other times it's being so focused on something that I'm totally unaware of what's happening on around me. Like I'm just not even aware of how time is passing. Somebody might say my name and I say, yeah, okay. And I really haven't actually heard them. And so then when we ask somebody to transition out of that hyper-focus stage to another activity, that can be one of those activating events that can be dysregulating. Unexpected changes are a huge one. And I think sometimes we really are not great about helping kids anticipate what changes might be occurring as we go forward. And so when we think about sometimes, especially with autistic kids, those unexpected changes can be very dysregulating. I know when I worked in the schools, for example, sometimes like the kids would walk into the classroom and there would be a sub, and then the kiddo who's autistic who wasn't expecting that sub to be there, like that's super dysregulating for them. That can be one example. Sometimes it's just a change in the schedule for the day, but sometimes there's also this piece where somebody has just this expectation in their head about how things are going to go that day, what the order is going to be, and something shifts or it doesn't go the way they expected, and all of a sudden they're really dysregulated, and you might have no idea what it was that caused that dysregulation. And so that's another piece that we can watch for. I always like to mention that we really want to also pay attention to increased or different irritability in our kids. So when we talk about, from a clinical perspective, looking for signs of generalized anxiety, for example, something that actually reaches that clinical level, what is often observable to outside people is an increase in irritability. It's often because kids aren't great at specifically labeling their emotions or disclosing their emotions. This might be one of the things that we notice. So if you notice a shift in that, that's maybe something to just take note of, so that you can hopefully just see how long it's going on, see if you need to talk to either, a school counselor or even a doctor. Just notice if that really increases and it sustains. It's not just like, for one day or whatever. So one of my favorite tools to help track activators is this app called Dailyo. So this is a little video that kind of shows you. What I love about this is it comes up with a little notification, those 5 little emojis there. And you can set it for whatever time you want. You just select which emoji it is, and then it gives you this option. And you can tailor all of this to however you would like it to be, but all of these different activities. What did I do that day? Did I play video games? Did I do homework? Was I at school? Was I at work? What was the weather like? How did I sleep the night before? And again, this is all customizable, and then it aggregates all of this data. And so this is a great tool to help identify what's going on those days. Look at all this data that it gives you. There's a free version. There's also a paid version. I love this. I think it's down at the end of this one when I scroll through, but you'll notice, look at this. On Fridays, my average daily mood was the highest out of any day of the week. Who would have suspected that? And so this is a really great tool that I really recommend. I use it a lot with my clients. And if you have a kid who's younger and they don't have their own device and you want to put it on your phone, that's great. Or again, you could come up with your own way of doing this as well. But the thing I like about this is it helps you go back and look for those patterns. What are the things that are happening on the days when I feel really down, when I feel really low? And you can look for what might then be a way to be proactive about supporting those things. Another piece with the investigate step is to do a lot of check-ins. So we really want to just normalize check-ins on emotions on a regular basis. So one thing that you can do here is you can just take your temperature on a scale of 1 to 10. How are you feeling today? I know that sometimes I do this with my clients and they rarely ever choose a whole number. It's always like 2.43, I don't know, whatever, or a negative 76. That's fine, whatever they want to do. But then trying to justify that sometimes taking your temperature is a little bit easier than just communicating the emotions directly. How are you feeling? Just doing those check-ins and making that a normal part of your conversations. You can also do like a daily rating or a journal. If you've got a kid, I find that actually with my own kids, I have 3 kids, they're 16, 14, and 9. And I have, with each of them at various times, we've shared a journal where we actually write back and forth to each other. And that has been a great way to facilitate conversations that are hard to have when you're just talking face to face. And so that's one way that you might be able to do this as well. But the biggest thing that I like to mention with this is that when we're talking with kids about this, when we're talking about investigating these emotions, we want to really make sure that they understand that we're just curious. We're just wondering about these things. There's no right way to feel. There's no wrong way to feel. As a matter of fact, when I talk about emotions with kids, rarely do I talk about good or bad emotions, although I might talk about comfortable or uncomfortable emotions, because emotions serve a purpose. They help us understand what's going on and how we're reacting to things. So that detective perspective is like, let's just investigate this. Let's figure out what's going on here. So I have this little clip from the podcast. It's with Mona Delahook, who is wonderful, but I need to make sure that I shared the audio. Okay, I sure did. Perfect. And so we're talking here about some alternative ways to help kids investigate and recognize what emotions they might be having.
There are 2 different interventions and techniques that I've
Oh, I'm sorry. I was adjusting the volume.
seen that I've used with clients that families might find really useful. So one of them was somebody described, instead of asking a child how they're feeling or to label an emotion, having them draw like what they're feeling. So it might be like a spiral or like a scribble or a zigzag or something, and kind of identifying that within the body, which I thought was really kind of a different way to describe that.
Love that. Love that. And
Yeah,
then you don't have to use words at all. It's symbolic through your squiggles or your colors or
Yeah.
whatever you use.
Yeah, whatever it might be. Yeah. And the other one is an app called, have you ever seen the Mood Meter app?
No, I haven't seen that one yet.
There's an app and you can get a poster for it, and it might be, I don't want to misstate where it's from, but anyway, but people can look it up. But basically what it does, what I love about the app is it's just a rectangle, but it kind of does kind of that pleasant to unpleasant or comfortable to uncomfortable, how it's feeling, and then how somebody is activated. And it's like a grid with all these squares, and it's kind of nice with the colors because they kind of blend like a spectrum, but you can kind of click around. And so you might click on this and it says, oh, well, I feel content. But if you go like one step up on activation or one step lower on pleasantness or whatever, it kind of guides kids to help find some of those words if they can kind of tie those things together.
Right. It sounds like it's kind of maybe scaffolding. We can do that as parents with ourselves, but sounds like the app is kind of using technology to help scaffold children onto greater and greater levels of awareness.
Yeah, so they can try to find that language and kind of tying the two things together.
I think that language isn't the magic. Finding a word for something isn't the magic. The magic is being able to find a way to connect with yourself and realize when you need help from other people. And of course, in our culture, language is one way to do that, or one of the main ways we have to do that. But I think it's so important to also think about the accommodations that we need to make for our non-speakers, right? And like even someone who doesn't have the motor control to be able to draw, but maybe uses their AAC device or FC, whatever it is, to try to help us know how we can help them, and if they're in physical pain or if the sensation is pleasant or unpleasant, if it's on the continuum of calm to agitated. So yeah, it's such a fascinating area, fascinating area. And if you think about, like, if our body is excited and feeling positive, that is the combination that we have for play. And a body that's active, that's feeling good, and that's a perfect condition for play. But if a body is excited and feeling really bad, then that's the condition for suffering. So there's just a lot to learn. There's so much to learn about this whole idea of interoceptive awareness.
So what I love about that, though, is recognizing that when we are tracking these activators, we don't necessarily just want to focus on those uncomfortable emotions. Mona was talking there about, like, what does it feel like when you're playing, when you're feeling silly, and identifying these things. And the other part that goes into this really is about recognizing body signals of emotion. So Mona does a lot of work about this kind of bottom-up processing that we talk about in neurodivergence, where we gather this information, especially also directly from our physical sensations that we're having in our body. And that's what informs us about those emotions. So when you think about it, if you try to figure out, like, what is it that identifies an emotion? How do I identify emotions? Sometimes we think that it's our thoughts that tell us this, but really, usually the first thing is that we feel it in our bodies. So you can talk, this is with younger kids, but with older kids, you can just maybe talk through it. But I like to draw diagrams with my kids, and I just do these little stick figures. This is about the extent of my artistic ability here, but they're drawing the diagrams, and, you know, how does your stomach feel? My face feels flushed, or I clench my hands, whatever that might be, to help really understand those body signals of emotions. So after we have worked on investigating and built that foundational knowledge, we can then work on communicating. We need to find ways to communicate about feeling dysregulated. So the first piece of this is just about building emotional literacy. How do we help kids find the just right emotion word? And this is just really powerful. So first of all, there is a skill, a strategy The first place that I heard it was from the book, The Whole Brain Child. I am not entirely sure if that was unique, like if they developed that, but that's just the first place that I heard it specifically. But it's called Name It to Tame It. So when you think about what's happening in our brains when we start to get emotionally dysregulated, we are moving away from our cognitive processes and our executive functioning that help us to regulate our emotions and our actions, and getting back into that emotional part of our brain, that midbrain area, that limbic system, all of these things that kind of are, related with stress hormones and fight, flight, or freeze, all of these different pieces. When you take a moment to name the emotion, it forces you to pause, to step back from that emotion and engage that cognitive part of your brain that's thinking and labeling that emotion. And that actually is a great tool to just get a little space from that emotion. Additionally, when you are able to identify that emotion, oh my gosh, I'm feeling really guilty right now, or I'm feeling really anxious and uncertain right now. When you are able to really identify what it is that's driving that emotion, it actually then helps you to feel a little bit of control over it, and also to reflect on, well, why am I feeling that way? So finding that just right emotion word is really powerful. We do want to recognize that with a lot of our I don't want to say a lot, some of our neurodivergent kids, that alexithymia can be a barrier. So alexithymia specifically is a term that refers to people who have a really difficult time identifying and labeling their emotions. Specifically, often they might have trouble identifying differences between emotions that feel kind of similar. So for example, anxiety and feeling excited, those physically can feel very similar. Sometimes this is related to people who are hyposensitive to their interoceptive sense. So your interoceptive sense is your how your body interprets your internal body signals. So if you don't notice that your stomach is feeling really clenched up or tight, or that you're, getting kind of sweaty, if you don't notice those physical sensations, if you have an under responsiveness to that, that can influence your ability to then label those emotions. And so this is something that I would say impacts research shows that it impacts about 10% of the total population. It doesn't necessarily impact all autistic individuals, but I would say that of those 10% of the general population, probably a good portion of them are on the autism spectrum. It just kind of falls into some of those pieces that are impacting them on a day-to-day basis. One way that you can work on building emotional literacy is by using these emotion wheels. So first of all, hang on. Oops. I've got this one right over here that I use in my office specifically. You can find these online. There's a million. So this was just a black and white one that I printed off and we colored. And so when kids are having a difficult time labeling emotions, they can use this. And basically the inner part of it are these very basic emotions. So think of the inside out characters, the original 5, plus surprise. And that's really in psychology what we would consider kind of the main basic emotions, and everything kind of falls under those. And so then you've got these little spokes that go out that show more and more nuanced emotions as you go out. So you can look at this and go, well, I feel kind of angry, but I'm not just angry. I feel kind of frustrated, or maybe I'm feeling irritated or feeling suspicious. It gives you all of these other terms to find that just right emotion word. So you can print one of these off and use it. Or if you want to get really creative with it, you can have kids create their own. You can just have this opportunity to give them a wheel like this that's blank and let them fill in their own words. It's a great opportunity to process with them what those emotions are and what the interconnectedness of that emotion, what those emotions is. So another piece as far as communicating is that we really need to model that emotional literacy. For some reason, many kids seem to think that adults have it all figured out, that we always know how to manage our emotions, that we always know what we're doing, and obviously could not be further from the truth in many ways. But partially that's because as adults, we do a lot of this internally. We don't necessarily talk about it or share exactly what we're experiencing. So we can model emotional literacy by just literally verbalizing what it is that we're experiencing so that they can see how we work through those steps. So if we break it down, the first step would just be to verbalize your own emotions. So you're just going to say and label the emotion, use that just right emotion word. You're going to normalize experiencing that vulnerability. Like, that's okay. It can feel uncomfortable when you experience this dysregulation. And then you're going to verbalize and explain your strategies. So here are some examples. These are examples that I pulled that I've used when I'm doing trainings in the school, but it's a good example, I think, that you can understand and apply even if you're not in the education setting. So frustration with technology. So the teacher's computer freezes while she's trying to show a video. So what could she say? Looks like this computer is being stubborn today. I was really excited to show you this video. So yeah, this is a little frustrating. So there's that labeling of the emotions. Now we're going to normalize the vulnerability. But hey, sometimes things just don't go as planned, and that's okay. And then verbalizing the strategies. Instead of stressing about it, I'm going to take a deep breath, try restarting it, and we'll see if that helps. In the meantime, let's take a quick stretch break, shake it out a little, whatever that might be. And so when you walk through this process and you, again, explicit instruction, you can label these, you can identify these, and help kids understand what that process is for recognizing the emotion, being okay with the emotion, and then finding steps to take to manage that emotion. So here's another example. Mistakes happen. Teacher spills a cup of water on her papers. I wasn't being careful with my cup and I spilled it. Honestly, I'm feeling a little embarrassed and frustrated with myself. So there's the labeling of the emotion. But hey, mistakes happen. Instead of stressing about it, I'm just going to clean it up and see if the papers are still usable once they're dry. So just finding a logical solution. So lots of different pieces that we can do with this. The last piece of communicating that I want to talk about is about self-advocacy. And the first thing I want to mention about self-advocacy, especially when we're talking about neurodivergent kids, is that self-advocacy is hard. If you have to think about a time that you had to self-advocate for something, it was probably pretty uncomfortable. It's not an easy thing for any of us to do. And so when we are working to help kids learn to self-advocate, it's really important that we open the door for them to self-advocate, that we give them some opportunities in order to really feel okay about it, feel safe about that self-advocacy. So this might be about like asking questions. It might also about like helping them self-advocate if we're helping them advocate at school, lots of different things with that. And so the steps for self-advocacy, again, teach kids how to do this, walk them through the steps. So the first step, step one, recognize when help is needed. So am I using negative self-talk? That would be a clue that I'm feeling frustrated, or recognizing like what are the emotions that I might feel when I feel like I need help? Or do my actions, like is the way that I'm acting, does that show that I need help? This kind of ties in with watching for those activators as well. So you have to recognize when help is needed. Step two is to find the right person to help you. So who do you trust to help you? What do you expect from those people? The third step, of course, is to communicate your needs. So how do I feel comfortable communicating that I need help? So maybe I want to write a note. Maybe I want to send a text message or an email. Maybe I just want to talk to somebody, in a private setting where there's nobody else around. Those are all things that we can do to help communicate those needs. And then this fourth step, and there are sub-steps to this one, just to, kind of be more complicated about it, but you follow the script. So the script for self-advocacy for kids is to be specific. What specifically is the need? What is the thing that they need help with? I always encourage kids to use neutral language. When you use language that is highly emotional, I help them understand that that is going to turn off the person who they are asking for help from. Sometimes it comes across as complaining. Sometimes it comes across as, whatever that emotion might be that might indicate. And then the third piece is that I really want kids to offer a suggestion or possible solution. This shows that they are trying to engage some problem-solving skills. How can I actually attempt to solve this on my own? And that goes a really long way when they're asking for help, to show that they're not just waiting for somebody else to solve the problem for them. And then the last one is ask for their permission to use your suggestion or ask for their help. So here's an example. So Sam, an autistic student, often feels overwhelmed in group social situations like lunch or group projects. So here's his script. And again, we can help kids write this out. So what specifically is the problem? I find it challenging to interact with group social situations like lunchtime or group projects. It's not that I don't want to engage, I just don't know how to join in or follow all those multiple conversations. So, here's so again, using that neutral language and being really specific. Here's the suggested solution. Could I work with somebody? Could I have a buddy or somebody who is going to help me guide me in those situations? And then the asking if it's okay. So can I do that? Or do you have a different idea that might work better? I like having them learn to kind of offer that, to say, maybe their solution logistically isn't a great one, or just might not, be feasible in whatever the situation might be. So we really want to help kids recognize how to communicate this with others in a way that is productive and solution focused. So our third letter here in our I CAN method is A, and that is for activating. We have to activate problem-solving skills and help kids learn to use cognitive flexibility to assess and determine those best strategies. So the first thing that I like to do is help kids recognize the size of the problem. And there are a lot of ways to do this. And the one mistake that I think a lot of times we make is that we will tell kids, well, this is not a big deal, or don't worry about this. It's not something to stress out about. And the problem with that is it doesn't validate the big emotions that they're experiencing in that moment. So first of all, if we can come up with a quick pause signal. So if we can come up with a way, like when we see that emotional dysregulation starting to build, have some sort of term or code or something that's like, hang on a second, let's take a minute. Let's have a quick pause here, a timeout, whatever term works for you and your family can be really helpful here. But we just want to take a minute to try to get out of that emotion brain and get back into this cognitive portion of the brain. One of my favorite activities to do is called emotional price tagging. So emotional price tagging specifically is about being able to assign a value to certain reactions. So here's how I usually do this with my clients. And again, you can do this with all ages. For younger kids, I would do it in a more concrete way by using either like Post-it notes or index cards. But for older kids, you might write it down on a piece of paper if you want to do that, or you could just even verbalize it and talk about it. But the way that I do it with my clients specifically is we get out index cards usually, and I have them just brainstorm and think about all of the reactions that they might have to a certain situation that causes them to feel frustrated. So it might be something where it's like a big sigh, kind of that frustration piece, all the way to like saying something that, insulting somebody, yelling, or all the way up to having a full meltdown and just really getting overwhelmed. So we brainstorm all of those. We write each one on an individual index card. Then we go through and we arrange them from like least smallest reaction to biggest reaction. And then we assign all of them a money value. So the smallest reaction is always 1 cent. It's a penny problem. And then we kind of go up from there, and the kids can use whatever increments they want. They might just go up to $20. They might go up to $1,000. It doesn't really matter. But you want to have basically this spectrum that you've created of all of these different intervals. Then what happens is you have this opportunity to reflect when there's been some emotional dysregulation. Hey, let's think about this for a second. So this was the situation. This was your reaction. Was the amount that you spent on this reaction, did it align with what the situation was? Because often a lot of problems are penny problems. And if you use this common shared language in your family, you can then hopefully prevent some of these things, if possible, recognizing like, hey, how much do you think this problem is worth? I know in the moment, a lot of times they all seem like extremely extremely expensive, worth all of the money in the world. But really though, you can help kids analyze this and try to put it in perspective with their reaction. Another piece is on perspective taking. So perspective taking is just really about recognizing how people are thinking about different things. So sometimes this is harder for some kids than others, but it is something that can really be helped. And first of all, I just want to mention, especially when we talk about autism, you'll have a lot of people who will say, well, autistic people they struggle with empathy or they don't have empathy. That is way too simplistic of a way to view this. So what I want to talk about with empathy is just recognizing, first of all, there are two different types of empathy. There is cognitive empathy, which is about guessing what somebody else is thinking. So trying to anticipate what they might be thinking in a certain situation. And that sometimes is where some autistic people struggle. Like I've got some clients and I'll say, well, what do you think they were thinking in that moment? And they'll sit there and they'll think, and they are really contemplating this. And then they will look at me and they will go, I have no idea like what was going through their head. And if they haven't been in that situation before, they have a hard time imagining what that might be. The other type of empathy is affective empathy. And affective empathy is the feeling alongside somebody. This person is feeling this way. I know they're feeling this way, maybe because they've told me, or also because I have had a similar situation and I feel that way also. And so affective empathy is really very closely aligned with compassion. And that is an area where many neurodivergent people have loads of empathy, is with this affective empathy. But it varies. Both of those things vary to each individual. So what I like to do with perspective taking is, again, I like to make it very concrete. And I like to just help kids brainstorm what are all the possible things that somebody might be thinking about in any given moment. So for example, why isn't Juan doing his part? It isn't fair that I have to do all the work. So it could be that he's thinking this work is too hard. Malia will be mad if I mess it up. Could be, I wonder how I did on my math test this morning. It was really hard. It could be, I wish I didn't have to do this project. It's so boring. And recognizing that it's often difficult to guess what somebody else is thinking. So we want to have all of these different try to anticipate what those are, guess what they might be, but then also just communicate and ask directly, like, so tell me what's going on, in order to really facilitate that. But those are just a couple of the things that we can really do when we're trying to activate all of these problem-solving skills. There are many, many more problem-solving skills. Those are just a couple of examples. So if you have some that have worked, maybe it's, I don't know, using some sort of sensory tool or something. I mean, there could be a lot of different pieces here that are part of this as far as regulating and activating those problem-solving skills. We just want to really try to develop that with kids and help them improve those ideas. So our last idea here is to navigate. So investigate, communicate, activate, and navigate. So getting through the dysregulation and returning to a regulated state. So first of all, when we return to regulation, when we talk, a lot of this has to do with mindfulness. I feel like mindfulness kind of gets a bad rap. We don't always think really about what it is, what it really means. And all it really is about an awareness between the body and mind connection. So I'm going to teach you a few of my just very favorite, simplest strategies that can help with this. And I know that for a lot of my clients who are neurodivergent, first of all, if you ask them to do any sort of visualization, a lot of them do not like to close their eyes. That feels really uncomfortable for them. So I would never ask them to do that. Sometimes if there's something that we're trying to kind of do in that way, I might just tell them to just pick a point on the floor or on the wall that they can just kind of look at, whatever it might be. But additionally, then sometimes we get these really complicated breathing exercises and the kids just, they're like, I can't do that. I hyperventilate. True or not true, either way, sometimes it's too much. So I like to use some that are very simple. So the first one that I like to use is counting breaths. You don't have to do anything different with your breathing. You're just going to focus on your breathing. You're going to think about what it is. So I'm going to back up for 1 second. Another reason that this is so useful, and the way I can get a lot of kids buy-in, is to talk specifically about why these things work to help us regulate our nervous system. And so I will sometimes talk to them about polyvagal theory. I will talk to them about your sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems. And just in the essence of time, I'm not going to go too much into those, but I would recommend, if you want to talk to kids about those, you can look up some information. There are some great YouTube videos that kind of explain this, but helping them understand, like, there is a scientific reason why these things work. I don't know about you. Sometimes when I get dysregulated and stressed, and then I remember to do some breathing, I'm always a little bit angry that it works so well. So I get it why kids don't always like it either, because sometimes you just want to feel that mad feeling, but they really do work, and there's a physiological reason why. So back to counting breaths. When we are counting our breaths, all you do, focus on your breathing, and you just count internally. So when you breathe in, it's a 1, breathe out, it's a 2, breathe in, it's a 3, breathe out, it's a 4, and then you count up to 10, and then you just restart at 1. And you just kind of do that. And usually what will happen is, as you're just kind of trying to focus on that breathing, it's going to naturally slow that breathing down. You can also encourage kids to focus on, what does that breathing feel like as it goes into their nose or as their chest rises and falls. And this is also an excellent technique to help fall asleep at night if you have kids, or if you have trouble falling asleep. Counting breaths is a great way to do this. Another one of my favorite breathing techniques is called straw breathing. So the way that you do this is, first of all, I just help kids, it's like, just do a full body scan real quickly. Just notice, how do you feel in your body? Do you feel tight in your shoulders? Do you have any pain anywhere? Are you feeling, kind of tired or tight, whatever it might be? Then you take a deep breath in and fill up your lungs. And then you imagine that you have a little tiny coffee stir or straw, or just a regular straw, whatever, but you're going to push that air out of your lungs and make it last as long as possible. Then once you make it last as long as possible, when you're out of air, you do another quick little body scan, and you just kind of adjust and go, how did I feel now? I know for me, my body just kind of goes like, oh, like it kind of feels like it deflates a little bit. And so this is another great way to help get back to that regulated state. We also really want to, when we can, allow breaks or alone time. So often when kids get dysregulated, we'll tell them, they'll be there and we'll say, they'll try to walk away, or they'll go to their room, and we're like, hang on, we're not done talking about this right now. Breaks and alone time are actually a really decent coping skill. Being able to walk away from something when you're feeling really dysregulated, it doesn't mean that you don't come back and address it, but we can allow that to happen to try to be okay before we have to finish processing whatever that situation might be. And honestly, it might be good for us as well. And then also just recognizing lots of sensory tools, lots of stims. If you have a child who stims, if we want to be neurodiversity affirming, we really want to try not to discourage them from stimming unless it's somehow self-injurious. So I know, like, sometimes I've had kids who will hit their head, let's try to find something else. But in general, stimming behaviors, those repetitive movements, so like happy flappy hands sometimes, or you'll notice, I've been rocking back and forth in my chair here the whole time. These are tools that actually help to regulate emotions and regulate executive functioning. And so as much as we can allow those things, the better it can be. Sometimes if you ask somebody to stop one of those stimming behaviors, it actually makes it much harder for them to then regulate their emotions. And so finding those tools that work, letting the kids know, like, okay, do you need to go pace for a little bit? Do you need to go, jump on the trampoline? Like, I don't know, whatever it might be for them, that really helps them to regulate. And so the last thing that I'll mention here as far as navigating is focusing on progress and not perfection. Kids who struggle with emotional regulation, like that didn't happen overnight, they're not going to improve this skill immediately either. It really is a process, but that's okay. focus on the explicit instruction, focus on the modeling, and really find opportunities to help them practice these things when they're calm, so that when they are dysregulated, they're more easily able to integrate these tools. So I know we wanted to leave some time for Q&A. So I will kind of pull this up here real quickly. So here are our last things. I'm also going to do our drawing, and I'm going to put the handouts in the chat for you. So those are all the things I think that I have off the top of my head, but go ahead, Charlene. Do we have any questions specifically?
We have really good questions. Emily, just quickly to start, people are wondering what the name of that mood tracking app is.
Mood Meter. Mood Meter. Yes, I love it. Are you talking about the one that I showed the video of, or the one I was talking to Mona with?
They were asking about both. Was one of them?
Dalio is the one that I showed the video of, and the other one is Mood Meter. And so, yeah, I love both of those. And so here is, I'm also putting the link for the handouts right here. And I'm just going to put the link again for the drawing if anyone wants to, maybe signed in a little bit late. And so we'll do that at the very end. But go ahead, Charlene.
Okay, thank you. So we've got some really good questions, Emily, about regulation and self-advocacy. Here we have a question. It says, so much of self-advocacy relies on self-awareness. What advice do you have for fostering self-awareness in neurodivergent kids so they can recognize when to advocate for themselves?
Yeah, that's a huge piece. And so I think when I think about this, a big part of this is also about the scaffolding, as far as like, you might hear people talk about self-regulation, and then a lot of another kind of buzzword I think we're hearing right now is about co-regulation, where we're building those skills alongside them. We kind of have to do the same for self-advocacy. It's not just self-advocacy. We have to kind of lead into that with co-advocacy. So we're helping guide them, or their teachers specifically, like if they know their needs, if they know their accommodations. That's what I kind of meant when I was talking about opening that door to advocacy, inviting those opportunities to kind of recognize. So sometimes it might be like, hey, I noticed this is going on. So maybe you give a couple of options. So which of these do you think might work that you could advocate for yourself that would help you? But you're right. It is really hard to have kids do this. And there are a lot of kids who just feel really uncomfortable with self-advocacy. They feel like they should be able to do things on their own. And so, hopefully though, if we make them, if it feels safe to them, then they'll be more willing to attempt some of those things. But I do agree that can be hard. And I think it takes the people around them to kind of build up to that, where they're really able to do it independently and recognize what those needs are.
Okay, thank you for that. Another parent has a 7-year-old, and they say that he is ADHD gifted. When he gets frustrated at school or doing small group work, he tends to walk outside of the classroom to calm himself down. The teacher would like him not to do that since the kids don't get it, but the parents support the action. Is there an in-between or a middle place that they can come to with that? The child wanting to regulate, leaving the classroom for a minute, the teacher wanting the kid to advocate without having to use the teacher as an intermediary.
Okay, so just to make sure I understand, so is the teacher not wanting the child to leave the classroom, or is the teacher not wanting the child to ask the teacher to, like, does it say necessary?
A little bit of both. Says the teacher mentioned he shouldn't walk out.
I feel like
they've been teaching him the teacher wants him to advocate for themselves, but also doesn't want the child to have to go to the teacher every time he needs help.
Well, why can't they just have like an anytime pass? Like that's the thing, that's a reasonable accommodation that I've seen very often, where it's like they don't have to ask, like they could maybe just have something that's laminated that they put on their desk, and then they have a designated place that they're going. But being able to walk away from those types of things, like I mentioned, is, Yep. Sue, you're with me. Hey, Sue, how are you? I recognize that name. But, having that opportunity to have a designated place, to me, that's fine. It becomes, I guess, a different issue if like the child is like, I don't know, you have to handle it on a case by case basis. But my thought is, I'm not, I would never worry about what the other kids think, because ultimately, actually what I find, especially from when I was in the classroom, is kids are just used to kids needing different things. Like they really are, it's not that uncommon. And so I think, any teacher though is also going to talk about the difference between being fair and being equal and recognizing that, every kid gets what they need. You get what you need in math. This kid gets what they need in math. This, all of those different pieces. And so we can just normalize that in the classrooms. I think that's really
Yeah,
important.
I can't see how it would be such a problem to say, Josh has an anytime pass and he goes outside for 1 minute.
Yeah, no, that's a really, and actually, if they wanted to make it more structured, for example, something I've seen done is take an index card, write 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on it, and get some of those little 1 minute hourglass timers. And then basically what you do is you put the index card down and then you put the timer on the 1, and then when it's over, you flip it over and put it on the 2. So the kids can kind of keep track and they just kind of rotate it through each of those numbers so they know when that 5 minutes is up. At any time, of course, they could come back and re-engage if they're ready. But that's just a way to help them kind of monitor how much time it is. And actually watching that hourglass with the sand falling is a little bit regulating as well.
Yeah, thank you, Emily. Here's a quick question. I know this might be tough, but I want to ask it. Speaker says, thank you so much for this great information. Have you ever tried it with nonverbal kids or kids who have ID?
So as far as kids who are non-speaking, yes, I think that a lot of the tools in here we can use really can be regulating, assuming that the receptive language is appropriate, and can kind of, but again, when we break down those things to explicit instruction and really break it down to the steps, we're hopefully modifying for all different ability levels. It really, I think, depends on the child and on the situation, but you are right that most of the things that I'm talking about here involve even those that don't really involve a lot of verbal communication, like back and forth. They do really kind of rely on a lot of that receptive language. So that would be a factor to consider as far as implementing some of these skills. Although I haven't really thought about it too much, but I suspect that there are probably some of them that could be adapted in various ways, specifically for non-speaking individuals who have the receptive language, especially if they have like augmentative and assistive communication devices. You could do the emotional literacy, like there's lots of different tools you could use there that would align with this.
Okay, Emily, we're coming to the end of our hour. Do you have time for one more question?
I do, and while you do that, I'm going to pull up this little wheel of names here to do the drawing. So go ahead, and then we'll call.
Okay, writer asks, for a young child, 8 years old, how do we differentiate whether an emotional outburst is caused by an underlying condition? In this child's case, it's mild cerebral palsy, or just a regular personality or growing up related learning issue. How do you tell?
My hope would be if I had this client coming into me in my office, my goal would be to help that child build the self-awareness to help differentiate that on their own, so that they could perhaps be able to tease that out. I know that that's a big ask, especially depending on their age, but I think that having this opportunity to communicate, having the opportunity to, just kind of explore that with them and with the parent, hopefully you can kind of learn like, oh, well, these particular things that cause that dysregulation, like this activating event, whatever that might be, that tends to be related to this one component over here, like the personality, this is related to the other. But sometimes I guess it's also just important to realize that sometimes it's overlap, sometimes it's a both and, but nonetheless, anytime you're working with some of these this dysregulation, hopefully some of these strategies would still work. You could still implement them, and then it may not matter as much directly where that's coming from, although it just depends on the situation there.
Okay, all right, thank you, Emily.
So here's our drawing here, and so I will email our winner. All right, Pauline, you're the big winner. So keep an eye out on your email and I will reach out to you. Charlene, it's all yours.
All right. Well, listen, thank you so much, Emily Kircher-Morris. This was an incredible discussion. Everybody's super grateful. They're looking forward to the video. We don't know whether you share your slides. That's entirely up to you. We typically don't, but if you would be willing,
Yeah.
well, that's a lot of hearts. And so we,
And there are the slides. I just put the link in the chat again. So feel free. Everyone can just download them there. And
aren't you great? Thank you. Thank you, Emily. Everybody, isn't this awesome? So the video too will be available shortly. We want to thank you all for your wonderful questions and for being with us, and Emily Kircher-Morris for a truly wonderful presentation. Take care, everybody. Stay on and answer those 4 quick survey questions. We really enjoyed having you all with us tonight. Thank you, Emily.
thanks for having me.
Bye for now.